This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
As 4 or 5 people have already said to me, it's good to be back. Thank you for the loyal following. All those hands went up. That was great. Before we get to Frank Cooper, we have a few housekeeping things to discuss. So this class is Men of the Movies, and it was designed to be a parallel course to what I did last year was Women of the Silver Screen. And Women of the Silver Screen, I did 8 actresses from the golden age of Hollywood. So I decided to do 8 men from the golden age of Hollywood. And that's what this is. In each class, we will zero in on a different actor. You have the class schedule has been posted to the class website. As you know, highly, highly recommended to see each film before the class meets, so you'll have a background. I will assume that you've seen the film, and the reason I bring that up is if there are any spoiler alerts or any endings I'm giving away, too bad. You're supposed to see the film, so you're supposed to already know the ending. So for next week, it's Edward G. Robinson and Double Indemnity. Now, I know those of you who took the noir class have already seen, and we've already discussed at length, Double Indemnity, but in that class, we were approaching it from the standpoint of noir. This time around, we'll be approaching it from the standpoint of Edward G. Robinson. So even if you've already seen the film, I suggest you see it again, and this time focus in on him, that element of the film. And that goes across the board. I know a lot of these films you may have seen. I always say, even though you've seen it many times, see it again. And if it's any given film, if it's your 10th time watching the film, just find a new element to focus in on. One of my favorite things is to watch Citizen Kane with the sound off, because I don't think it's a great film, but I think it's fantastic, brilliant cinematography. Same thing with Bride of Frankenstein. Try watching that with the sound off sometime, and just look at the cinematographer and the set design. So if there are films on the list that you've seen and very familiar with, don't not watch it before the class, but find something. And even if it's not the actor we're focusing on, the music, the cinematography, the dialogue, whatever you haven't necessarily zeroed in on before to make it a little bit new for you. My standard warning about online sources. There are sources for watching each film. I don't know how each of you, access the film to watch. TCM, Turner Classic Movies, is a great resource. And at any given point, they could be showing any number of films by any number of these people. So I strongly suggest you constantly check the schedule for Turner Classic Movies. And also there's On Demand. Don't forget On Demand. I go in there all the time just to see what's available. So that's another resource. If you're watching these on your computer, the Internet Archive is a really good source, and I've listed that where these films might be available. But there is also this other website, RK Video. That is a great source for watching films, and I can find 99% of the films I go looking for there. But it's a Russian site. I have a feeling they're not too careful with guarding your information. Do not register. They will urge you to register. You can use the site without registering if you decide to go there. And if that window pops up that says register, just knock the window out, and eventually it stops popping up. But do not register for that site. Okay, so you are all going to watch each film before the class, and that's done. I was preparing this class, and I had 2 insights. When I did Women of the Silver Screen, I picked 8 actors that came, and I often use actor interchange with actresses, so that was not a mistake. I picked 8 women actors, And it organically happened, but once I saw the pattern emerging, I did it on purpose, which is the 8 women actors that I picked for that class also mirrored the industry. It showed the changing culture and mores and zeitgeist of the American public, and it reflected how women are treated in Hollywood, which is, to sum up on one word, 2 words, very unfairly. They have ageism to deal with, sexism to deal with, stereotype roles to deal with, and it suddenly occurred to me that that wasn't happening with these men, that there is no parallel. With the women, it paralleled the development of the industry. It didn't happen with the men. So it just struck me, again, it just underscored how Hollywood has never been particularly fair or pleasant toward women. A lot of the issues that came up when we discussed those 8 women are not going to come up here. These men, even when they do come up, I was going to say these men are not sex symbols. Well, some of them actually are. Gary Cooper certainly was. But there weren't censorship issues as there were with Jean Harlow and Clara Bow. Well, not Clara Bow because she was before the code. So it's just interesting how, the more you research Hollywood and the more you know, the more that issue comes up of women, double standard. Women are treated differently from men, and that's all there is to it. The other thing that struck me about these 8 men, and we're going to see this, is the acting style. These 8 men who were, they're icons of the golden age, do not transform themselves for their roles. We're basically going to see the same acting performance in almost every one of these actors. They get up and they are basically themselves. And it struck me, because all of these people were working before the method came along. We take this for granted today. For those of you not familiar with the method is a style of acting that came out of theater. And before the method came, and it came along in the 50s. And it was first introduced in the theater. It was introduced to the American public by Marlon Brando on Broadway in Streetcar Named Desire. He blew audiences away. They had never seen anything like that before on the American stage. These guys are all coming along and all were active before the method came along. So before the method, and the method said, you don't just get up and say lines. You don't just get up and be yourself saying lines. You become the character. And you do that by going inward. And so if a character, what Marlon Brando did, when there came time for a scene where Stanley got all nuts, he was throwing dishes around. He appeared in his undershirt. He appeared in a torn undershirt with the muscles showing and hunky guy, and this was not done before. We're not going to see that here. In each of these people, the one exception I can think offhand, just looking over the list, is what Bogart did in African Queen. Bogart had never done a role quite like that before in his career. But across the board here, in all the Gary Cooper films, he's basically Gary Cooper. Edward G. Robinson, same thing, he's Edward G. Robinson. Henry Fonda, Spencer Tracy, who had more of an emotional range, was still underneath Spencer Tracy. So it occurred to me, and this doesn't go any further than this, how much the method transformed American acting and what American audiences see both on stage and on the screen. And I'm bringing it up because we take it for granted. And I'm bringing it up also to account for the fact that in the next 8 weeks, we're not going to see this huge range of acting because it just wasn't being done until, in all fairness, Bogart did do it, although the method didn't exist. In 1936, when he did Petrified Forest, and he was Duke Mantee, in all fairness to Bogey, he was doing it, whether he knew it or not. He didn't shave. Actually, he didn't shave, and his beard was groomed each time to have a certain look. And he walked in he literally was slumped over, and audiences had not seen anything like that. And when he talked, he would spit, And audiences, when it was done on stage, were lining up to get front row seats so they could see the stubble in his beard. But aside from that, we don't really, and he wasn't coming on and doing it. He was just being Bogart in that particular role. It wasn't until Brando came along and said, okay, this is a method of acting. Then we get James Dean, we get Montgomery Clift, and everything changed. So those are the two big insights I had in preparing the class. And now we get to Frank Cooper. That's not a mistake. He was born Frank James Cooper. He was born in Montana. He had English parents. When he was about 5 years old, his father, who was both a lawyer and a state Supreme Court justice, bought a ranch outside. He grew up basically in Helena. Is it Helena or Helena? Does anybody know? Helena? Thank you. Grew up in Helena. And spent summers as a kid on the ranch. He learned horseback riding, hunting, fishing, so he grew up in that Western milieu. When he was about 8 years old, his mother decided she wanted him to have a proper English education, so she packed him and his older brother off to England, and he spent the next few years in England getting a proper English education. He comes back. He's about 15 or so when he comes back to the United States, and he enrolls in high school in Montana, but it takes him about 5-6 years to go through high school because he kept taking time off to work on the ranch. So he grows up being a cowboy. That wasn't acting. By the time he hits Hollywood later, he is a full-fledged cowboy. And he goes to college, and he discovers his passion, which is art. It's not acting, it's art. He starts taking art course. Well, it starts in high school, and by the time he gets to college, he wants to be an artist. So he enrolls in college as an art major, and while he is there, he applies for this college drama club, and he gets rejected. They don't want him. So he's going to be an artist. That's what he's going to do, and he goes through college determined to be an artist, and when he gets out of college in his early 20s, in fact, he's knocking around Helena, and part of what he's doing is he's selling editorial cartoons to the local paper. So that is his path in life. When he's about 24, his father moves the family to Los Angeles, and he gets to LA, and he now needs money to pursue art. He's got to take these art courses, and they cost money. So he's knocking around doing odd jobs, and he runs into two old acquaintances from Montana, and they're cowboys too, and they are working as film extras and stunt people in movies. So to finance his art education, he starts working as either an extra for $5 a day or a stuntman for $10 a day. And again, this is to finance his art education. He doesn't really like it that much. He doesn't mind the extra work, but he finds the stunt work dangerous both to the stuntmen and to the horses, and this disturbs him. So he starts looking around for another, better way to make money to pursue art. And he goes, well, I'm in the film business anyway, why don't I try this acting thing? So he starts getting work as an actor, and again, he's an actual cowboy. He's a good rider, he can do more complicated riding, and he's not too hard on the eyes either. So he starts getting fairly steady work as an extra. And after a while, he says to himself, this could work. So he hires people, he pays to get a screen test done, and he hires a casting director to be his agent. And the first thing she says to him, Frank, there are a lot of actors named Frank Cooper. We got to get you a different name. She happens to be from Cary, Indiana. She says, what about Cary? And he likes it. So he now starts work. That's how he gets the name Cary Cooper. Frank James, now it's Cary Cooper. And he starts getting work. And he starts getting noticed. And at this point, he's mainly playing cowboys. I should back up a minute, because I meant to say this at the top. His career on a macro level has basically 3 stages. to it. The first stage, when he becomes known as an actor, is he's the Western hero. And in fact, he went a long way toward establishing that standard of what is the Western hero, the white shirt, the white hat, the code of Western honor. So that's his first phase. And later on, he moves into his second phase where he's still a hero, but now he's the common man hero. He starts working with Frank Capra, and he becomes the John Doe. And then the third phase is when he gets older, he starts playing these older, more mature roles of a man with issues in his past who is seeking redemption. And his last several films are those kind of roles. So he's got three tiers of his hero-dom, if you will. At this point, he's in that Western hero phase. He starts getting noticed. I think it's MGM signs him to a contract. Samuel Goldwyn Productions, it's not MGM yet, for $50 a week, and he's kind of now on his way. Along the way, he does other things besides Westerns. At one point, he was a Russian Cossack, at various roles. He's also doing extra work. And he starts having these romantic relationships with the people he's meeting who are actresses. He begins a romantic relationship with Clara Bow. Clara Bow is at the top of her career at this point. If you remember, in Women of the Silver Screen, we did Clara Bow. We did It. She helps him get better roles. He appears in It as a reporter, and we saw him. And in Wings, footnote, it was the first film to win the Academy Award when the Academy Awards were established. He has a little bigger role. He actually has some lines. It's a silent film, but he's got some dialogue in it. So she's helping him get roles, and he begins to get noticed. He begins to get noticed by audiences, particularly by women audiences. So as this is happening, he's getting more and more roles and bigger roles. And then the talkies come along. And as you well know, not every actor or actress was able to make that transition from silent to sound, but he does. He's got this mellifluous voice, and he's got that very fun drawl, and he's got this really interesting rhythm of speaking. So he seamlessly makes the transition to talkies. And in 1929, he gets his breakthrough role in The Virginian. The Virginian is a Western. It's a pretty dang corny Western. In the opening scene, Gary Cooper meets another guy, goes, "You dang polecat, haven't seen you in a coon's age. What rock did you crawl under, partner?" And it's kind of laughable. But the film is not only a breakthrough for Gary Cooper, but it's one of the first sound films to show us that Western hero. He literally has a white shirt and a white hat. And the two other guys in it who are not heroes are dressed in black. And we meet this character who's upright, who's honest, who's got this code of justice, who's a little bit shy around women, shucks, and treats women with respect and doesn't like those no-good polecats who shoot a man in the back. And this goes a long way to establishing this trope of the Western hero. Ironically, there's also a scene, the climax of the film, Gary Cooper has been having problems with somebody in town all through the film, and the day Gary Cooper gets engaged to be married, the guy challenges him to a gunfight. And there's a scene in the hotel room where his wife is begging him not to go out and meet the guy in the street. And you're watching this in 1929, and this sounds vaguely familiar. And she says, "Don't go, we can leave town." He goes, "No, I've got to go." "No, don't go, you'll wreck our future." He goes, "If I run away now, I can never look myself in the face again, and word will get out that I ran from a fight. I can't do it." And she says, "Well, if you go do it, there's no future for us." And he looks at her, he goes, "Sorry, got to go do it." And all the townspeople are waiting for the gunfight, and he goes out on it. It's astounding how much it mirrors that climax, High Noon. In fact, one person once said that High Noon was essentially a remake of The Virginian. Don't see The Virginian. It's really not worth, unless you really want to go deep on Gary Cooper. It's until that scene, it's really a pretty corny movie with this corny dialogue, but then you perk up for that scene. So he makes The Virginian, and that's a breakthrough role for him, and now he's kind of really on his way. And he starts working with top-name directors and top-name actresses. In 1930, he does Morocco, which was the first American film with Marlene Dietrich. Joseph von Sternberg directs. He makes in 1930, 1931, he makes 12 films in 2 years. That's how popular he is, and he gets exhausted. He runs down his health. He gets jaundice, he gets anemia because he's working so hard. So he takes a year off and he goes to Europe, comes back in health, and in 1932 he does A Farewell to Arms with Helen Hayes, based on the Hemingway story. And in 1933 he makes Design for Living, Ernst Lubitsch. Design for Living is an interesting film. It's Gary Cooper, Frederick March, and Marion Hopkins. It's set, I believe, in Paris. Might be London. I think it's Paris. And both men are in love with Miriam Hopkins, and she has to choose. Or does she? Maybe she doesn't have to choose either or. Maybe she can have both. And they all know it. They are having a ménage à trois. Not at the same time. She's alternating back and forth. But this is pretty heady stuff. Now, this is pre-code. This is 1933. I got to stop. Just quick show of hands so I know. How many of you are not familiar with the production code? Because I know we cover it in basically every class. Okay, crash course in the production code. Hollywood for a long time was known as a hotbed of sin to a lot of the American public. They were going to bring down our morals. When sound came in, it became a really big concern for those people concerned about such things, because before that it was only images, and now you could hear things in sound. So states started to establish local censorship boards, and the movies faced censorship from from various states, and the federal government threatened to get involved, and the studios did not want this to happen. So they said, you don't have to govern us, we'll govern ourselves, we will set up a code for the content. Then we will treat certain subjects very delicately, and some we won't treat at all. And the code was written in 1930, and didn't really kick in until around 1932. And it was being completely ignored by the studios because there was no way to enforce it. So they said, yes, yes, we're policing ourselves, and they kept doing the sex and violence thing. Finally, the government put teeth in the code, where in order to, and behind this whole thing was the Catholic Church. Jesuits wrote the code. No sex, no nudity, no homosexuality, no drugs, no violence. In other words, all the stuff that make people human taken out of the movies. Married couples, twin beds. No representation of sex at all. And it was Catholic doctrine. Somebody described it, because the studios were mainly owned by Jews, and this was Catholic doctrine, and most of the country was Protestant. It was a Jewish product shaped by Catholic doctrine sold to Protestant America. This is how somebody summed up the code. When we talk about pre-code, so from 1934, specifically July 1st, the new enhanced code kicked in. If you did not have a certificate of approval from the Hayes office or the Production Code Administration, same thing, you could not show the movie in an American theater, and if you did, you were fined $25,000 a day for showing the film. And if it did not have a seal of approval, Catholics were forbidden to go see the movie. So when we say pre-code, we're talking roughly 1930 to 1934. And the code was in effect, but there were none of the restrictions. And the pre-code films are pretty hot stuff. There's a lot of sex and things about double standard. And then from 1934 to 1968, the code was in effect. And that's why every gangster film you see, by the end, the criminal has to get punished. If you commit a crime, you have to get punished. If it's a major crime, you have to go to the chair or the gas chamber. And if you sinned, you had to be punished, and suicide was not an option for getting out of being punished. So that's why all these, between 1934 and 1968, all the films have that same kind of ending. One of my favorite pre-code films is the Nora Shira film. I just love talking about this. They're married, they're happily married, and her husband has a one-night stand. And she finds out about it, and he goes, "Oh dear, it didn't mean a thing. Nah, it doesn't mean a thing." And she said, "Okay." He goes out of town. She has a one-night stand. Comes back to town. She says, "I balanced the books." "What do you mean you balanced the books?" "Well, you did it, I did it, but it doesn't mean a thing." And he cannot handle it. If it's one thing, if he does it, when she does it, he can't handle it. And it's a very telling story of this double standard that existed in society involving men and women. So anyway, this brings us back to Design for Living. Design for Living is a fun film about that challenges sexual mores. He then, in 1936, he makes Mr. Deeds Goes to Town with Frank Capra. And this begins that second phase. This is the first time on screen he's playing that all-American common man he's still a common man, but he's a hero. And the way Capra described it, Gary Cooper already had a screen persona of symbol of honesty, courage, and goodness because of all that Western stuff. Frank Capra, who directed and wrote along with Robert Riskin, said, this is Frank Capra now, "As soon as I thought of Gary Cooper, it wasn't possible to conceive anyone else in the role of Mr. Deeds. He could not have been any closer to my idea of Longfellow Deeds, and as soon as he, meaning Robert Riskin, who wrote the film, could think in terms of Cooper, Bob Riskin found it easier to develop the Deeds character in terms of dialogue. So it just had to be Cooper. Every line in his face spelled honesty. Our Mr. Deeds has to symbolize incorruptibility, and in my mind, Gary Cooper was that symbol." For those of you not familiar with Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Mr. Deeds lives up in Vermont. He's a very simple man, and his cousin happens to be one of the richest men in America. And when his cousin dies, Mr. Deeds inherits the fortune. So he moves down to New York, and everybody wants a piece of him. A newspaper woman, Jean Arthur, is assigned to do an in-depth story on him. So she begins hanging out with him without telling him she's a newspaper reporter to get the goods on Mr. Deeds. And of course, a romance develops, and of course, he finds out that she was using him, and of course, he feels betrayed. Meanwhile, all of the slick city slickers are trying to use him, but he's Mr. Deeds, and he sees through them all. And at the end, he decides to give the money away, so of course, he's declared insane, and there's a trial, and it's very Frank Capra. They do this, and Gary Cooper is the ideal, as I said, Mr. Deeds, and this begins this phase where he is the American folk hero, the common man. So his career is really cooking now, and in 1936 he winds up signing contracts with two different film studios, Paramount and MGM. And Paramount sues because they feel that they had an exclusive with him, and goes to court, and the court says, well, he's got time to work for both studios. So now he's working for both studios, and he's working more than ever. And we now enter the, in 1938, he works with Lubitsch again, Ernst Lubitsch, for Bluebeard's Eighth Wife. And in that, he plays a philanderer who just goes through women one at a time. That's why he's got the nickname Bluebeard. And audiences reject it. They don't want to see Gary Cooper playing a shallow philanderer. So even though it's Ernst Lubitsch, and it's a well-done film, it doesn't do very well. They just don't want to accept him in that role. He's our hero. I guess it would be like Gregory Peck doing the same thing. So that doesn't do that well. And he is doing really good. By 1939, he is the highest paid person in the United States. That's how much money he's earning. And in 1939, there's this guy, David O. Selznick, who's working on some Civil War drama you probably never heard of. And when he goes to cast Gone with the Wind, he offers it to Gary Cooper first. He offers Rhett Butler to Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper turns it down. And in his words, he says, I didn't see myself as quite that dashing, and later when I saw Clark Gable play the role to perfection, I knew I was right. So he turns it down. He doesn't really have any regret about it. And now in the 40s, he reteams with Frank Capra to meet John Doe. When Capra approaches him, he says, I'll send you the script. Cooper says, you don't have to, Frank. You're involved. I'll do the film without even seeing the script. Meet John Doe is a really, really good film. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I like it. I think it's a better film than Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. His character is more engaging. It's got a better ending. Well, I think you all know Meet John Doe. Takes place during the Depression. He's homeless. A newspaper concocts, Barbara Stanwyck concocts a scheme where John Doe is going to commit suicide on Christmas Eve. He's going to throw himself off City Hall to protest the state of things in the world. And he goes along with the scheme, and along the way, of course, he falls in love with Barbara Stanwyck, who, of course, falls in love with him. Meanwhile, the people in power have a whole other agenda that he finds out about. And again, it's that typical American hero taking on the corporate, the power structure, and proving that the people are stronger than any demagogue who might come in and try to seize power. That might sound vaguely familiar to something going on today, but never mind. Okay, so he does meet John Doe in and then we've got the war. And post-war, he swings into his third phase. He's now, post-war, he's approaching his 50s. He's getting older. He does The Fountainhead in 1948. And again, audiences reject it. I think with good reason. The Fountainhead just never gels I don't think it ever gels. And when you think about why isn't this gelling, it's Gary Cooper. The role, it's a very heady intellectual role, but it's not heady intellectual in the sense of personal redemption. When he does these later personal redemption roles, you really feel it. And somehow in The Fountainhead, he's spouting all this philosophy, and it just doesn't feel sincere. And as somebody said, described it as Mr. Deeds out of his element. It just doesn't really gel. After The Fountainhead, we come to High Noon, which I'm going to kind of skip over because we're really going to go into detail of that in a few minutes. But now he is older, and in fact, in High Noon, when he's walking around and he seems to be in pain, he really was in pain. He was having back problems. He had bleeding ulcers. When he made High Noon, he had just had surgery for the bleeding ulcers. So when you see him on screen looking very uncomfortable, he really was. So he makes High Noon, and then he swings into these other personas, this other persona. He makes The Court-Martial Billy Mitchell with Otto Preminger, that's based on a true story, an Air Force general who advocates air power and gets court-martialed because he's going against the Army's policy. He makes Friendly Persuasion with William Wyler. He plays a Quaker. Strange film, Friendly Persuasion. I had never seen it until last week. And when I finally saw it, I didn't like it very much. And it's partly because I think what they're exploring in it, which is he's a Quaker and the Civil War comes. And they don't believe in fighting, so they won't fight. And people are coming around accusing them of not loving their country. And then the Rebs come, and it's in Indiana, and the Rebs are going to invade Indiana, and are you going to sit back and not fight for your land? So some of the Quakers go to fight, and it's exploring this moral dilemma. But that climax that it has, I think, doesn't quite work. Then he makes, with Billy Wilder in 1956, Love in the Afternoon, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because he's paired as an older philanderer again in Paris with Audrey Hepburn, and audiences can't accept the age difference. And Billy Wilder summed it up where he said, "I got Coop the week he got old," was Billy. Now you could clearly see his age. In High Noon, you see it. I mean, I was watching it with a friend, and she said, he looks like he's marrying his daughter. There were 29-year difference between him and Grace Kelly. He was 50, she was 21. But in Love in the Afternoon, it really, really does show. So his age is showing, and he swings into now really this third phase, and he makes 3 Westerns with Anthony Mann. And they're really good films. At least 2 out of the 3 of them are really good. In 1958, he makes Man of the West, which I really suggest you see. It's a really interesting film. It's kind of hard to explain, but he's on a train that gets robbed by his former gang. He used to be an outlaw, and he winds up with the gang, but they've taken away his gun, and there's a woman who, to protect, he says, she's my woman, but he's got a wife and kids at home, but nothing's going to happen between them. It's this real interesting ethical, and he's not even tempted. She falls in love with him, and he could have an affair, and he won't do it. Meanwhile, he's got to deal with this outlaw gang who still are not giving him back his gun, and Lee J. Cobb plays this almost psychotic gang leader. Really good film. So he makes Man of the West. He makes in 1959 The Hanging Tree, where he plays both a doctor who happens to be a gunslinger, interesting combination there, who is running from a secret. He's seeking redemption, but he's not the nicest guy in the world along the way. And then he makes, with Anthony Mann, They Came to Cadora, which is just about a man who is accused of cowardice, who gets the job of nominating soldiers for the Congressional Medal of Honor. So there's that interesting thing, and this whole thing is his quest to understand cowardice and heroism. Wrapping up, after The Hanging Tree, They Came Together, he makes 2 more films. Wreck of the Mary Deer, which I suggest miss, just not that good, and The Naked Edge, 1961. Miss with a capital M. It's a very cheesy 60s film, and that is his last film. Along the way, he is nominated for 5 Academy Awards. He wins 2. He is nominated for Mr. D Goes to Town. He loses to Paul Muni in The Story of Louis Pasteur. He is nominated for Sergeant York, and he wins. Sergeant York is the story of Alvin York, who's from, I believe it was Kentucky, it might have been I think Kentucky, who goes over to fight in World War I, even though he does not believe in killing, and he comes out a hero. So he wins the Academy Award for Sergeant York. He gets nominated for Pride of the Yankees, in which he played Lou Gehrig, but he loses to James Cagney in Yankee Doodle Dandy. He gets nominated for Whom the Bell Tolls. He loses to Paul Lucas on Watch on the Rhine, and he wins for High Noon. Which brings us to High Noon. High Noon was a project of Stanley Kramer and Carl Foreman. Stanley Kramer, a name you probably know, he was involved with The Defiant Ones, Judgment at Nuremberg, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Inherit the Wind, Ship of Fools, On the Beach. So Stanley Kramer, left-leaning in politics, progressive films. Carl Foreman was involved with Home of the Brave, The Men, which is Marlon Brando's first film about paraplegics, Bridge on the River Kwai, Guns of the Navarone, and The Victors. So they have their own company, Carl Foreman and Stanley Kramer, and they're mavericks. They're left-leaning politically, they're socially progressive, they don't like the studio system, they vow never to become part of it, they have their own production company, and they're churning out good films, to the point that Harry Cohn over at Columbia offers Stanley Kramer to come over to Columbia. And Stanley Kramer says, okay, we'll do it, because we have bigger budgets. But he's got one last film to make, which is High Noon. So he leaves Carl Foreman and Fred Zinnemann, the director, kind of in charge of that, and he kind of migrates over to Columbia. Fred Zinnemann was one of the people who came over from Germany with Billy Wilder and that whole artistic migration group. Fred Zinnemann had never directed a Western. He's Austrian. Carl Foreman had never written a Western. What the hell is going to happen here? And the story is based on an original story written by Carl Foreman, which happens to be extremely similar to a story published called The Tin Star, a short story. So they buy the rights to The Tin Star. It's similar by coincidence, so they're not accused of plagiarism. And they start looking around to cast this thing. And they first offer the role to John Wayne, who turns it down, who calls this film the most American film he has ever seen. He hates this movie. They offer to Gregory Peck, who turns it down. Not because he doesn't believe in the film, but because he has made The Gunfighter, and he feels it's a very similar role to The Gunfighter. So he turns it down. They go to a few other people who turn it down. And finally, they realize, what's Gary Cooper doing these days? Gary Cooper has entered that phase of his career where he's not getting choice parts anymore. They're offering these mediocre roles. In the words of his daughter, who was watching him go through this, they keep sending over these crappy scripts, and sooner or later you have to do one. You do, because you have to pay the bills. So he's getting all these scripts and he's turning them down, and he's at a point in his career now where he's earning $275,000 a film. They being Foreman and Zinnemann and Kramer, cannot afford this. But he reads the script and he realizes this is a good role. So he offers to do it for $100,000. And even though his career is kind of about to start fading, he's still a household name. So they've got Gary Cooper. This is great for them at a cut rate. They've got this young actress who has only made one other film to date called Grace Kelly. And Kramer has seen her in this other film she's made, and he goes, oh, she'd be good. So again, there's 21 years difference between them, and it wouldn't work the other way. If the woman was 50 and the man was 21, audiences wouldn't buy it. Men have this thing where these older men can have romantic interest in these younger women. So they cast Grace Kelly. For the role of the deputy Harvey, they first go to Lee Van Cleef, who doesn't get the part because he, in their opinion, he looks too vicious. So they say to Lee Van Cleef, have surgery on your nose and we'll give you the part. And Lee Van Cleef says, what are you, crazy? Not doing that. So he turns it down, and the role goes to Lloyd Bridges. Lee Van Cleef does get a part in the film. He has no dialogue. He's one of the outlaws. So he's there. And they cast as Helen Ramirez, Katie Jurado. Katie Jurado is a Mexican actress who has only made one American film, and she only did that because it was filmed in Mexico. She doesn't speak English. And for that one film, she learned her lines phonetically. But they want Katie Jurado, and so she learns English in order to be able to be in High Noon. Katie Jurado was later married to Ernest Borgnine. Think about that. Interesting pair. Very, very volatile marriage. He was insanely jealous of her, and she attracted a lot of men, including Marlon Brando, who fell in love with her dark, piercing eyes, those black eyes staring out at you from nowhere. So we have Katie Jurado. And the cast gets filled out with other names. Lon Chaney Jr. plays the ex-marshal. Thomas Mitchell, who is Uncle Billy in Thank You, It's a Wonderful Life. We have Otto Kruger, and we have Henry Morgan, who you know from MASH. And so they start the film. For the director, Fred Zinnemann, his image, when he read the script, the image that burned into his mind were those railroad tracks we see in the beginning, going out to nowhere. That image, for him, kind of shaped the film. And structurally, as far as Zinnemann was concerned, the film had three structural elements. We have the threat. Frank Miller is coming to town. Uh-oh. Then we have the seeking help, which is Gary Cooper is going to everybody in town seeking help, and they're all turning him down. And then we have the clocks. The film is actually filmed in real time. The entire film is 85 minutes long. The first 10 minutes of the film is that introduction, where we see the men riding into town, and the wedding. And then when we hear Frank Miller is coming, we get our first shot of the clock. And it is 20 to 11, which gives us 80 minutes till noon. And the film is about 75 more minutes to the film. So the film is unfolding in real time. And every time there's another little twist, we go back to the clocks. And the clocks are getting bigger and bigger, if you notice. As we get closer to noon, the clocks get enormous. So for Fred Zinnemann, those were the three elements. Now, and quick thing about the fight scene. The fight scene between Gary Cooper and Lloyd Bridges. Gary Cooper was in a lot of pain. His back was hurting him. He had had surgery on the bleeding ulcers, but he did not use the stunt double to do the fight scene. Lloyd Bridges he doesn't say when he tells the story which son it was, Bo or Jeff, thank you. Bo or Jeff, but his son wanted to see this fight scene, so he lets his son hide in the barn. This is filmed in a barn, in a hayloft. And the son is watching the fight scene, and it ends where Gary Cooper throws a bucket of water on Lloyd Bridges. At that point, his son bursts into laughter, and the whole take is ruined, and they had to do it again. Gary Cooper, as Lloyd Bridges said, was very nice about it. He didn't complain. He said, well, okay, we have to do it again. So that's the fight scene. That scene where Frank Miller arrives on the train, something interesting happened there. The camera is set up low. We see the train way in the distance approaching. And first, a blast of white smoke comes out of the train. It's way, way, way back in the background. And Zinnemann says, okay, that looks good. We like that. And the train is getting closer. This is one take. And the guy lets out a blast of black smoke. And Zinnemann says, oh, that looks really good. There's a good contrast. What he did not know is that the white smoke was for effect. The black smoke was a signal that the brakes on the train were failing. The cameraman is on the tracks, and they don't know that the black smoke means get out of the way. And they don't know it until the train is not stopping as it's approaching the cameraman. He manages to leap out of the way. At the last minute, the camera is smashed to pieces, but the film magazine survives. So we actually did get the train and the smoke approaching. So there was that element. Music is a huge, huge part of this film. Music on the film, sung by Tex Ritter, became a big hit for Tex Ritter, later became a big hit for Frankie Laine. The music is by Dmitri Tiomkin, and the lyrics are by Ned Washington. Kramer has moved over to Columbia, and when the film is completed, Harry Cohn, who runs Columbia, says to Kramer, I want to see the movie. I'm curious. What'd you make? And Kramer says, you're not going to like it. No, I'm not going to show you the film. Harry Cohn goes over there one night and basically walks away with a print of the film and watches it. The next day, Kramer finds out, and he's enraged, and he goes into Harry Cohn's office and says, how dare you look at that without my permission? Harry Cohn says, doesn't matter. It's a piece of crap anyway. Turns out he had seen it without the music. And that underscores what a big part for this particular... Music is a big part of any film, but it really is a huge part. Seeing it without the music, it meant not that Harry Cohn was the best judge of content anyway, but whole different effects, seeing it without the music versus seeing it with the music. Now we come to the whole thing about it's a parable and anti-McCarthyism and all of that stuff about this film. Over the years, this film has come to be perceived as anti-McCarthyism. And when you hear that, you start looking, well, who represents HUAC and who are the bad guys? For those of you not familiar with HUAC, and it's going to come up with every person here, House of Un-American Activities. HUAC, conservative elements in Congress, became convinced there were communist elements in Hollywood. They were inserting communist propaganda into American films. They're going to take over. So there were two waves of HUAC hearings in Washington. The first was roughly 47 to 48, and that's when the whole Hollywood 10 thing came up, where these 10 people were convicted and all went to jail. And the second wave was in the early 50s, and that's when Elia Kazan was called in to testify. In the first wave, in 47, Gary Cooper was called in to testify before HUAC. Gary Cooper's politics were conservative. He was a conservative. In the beginning, he was actually for the blacklist. Blacklist was this unofficial list of anybody accused or found to be member of the Communist Party, ex-member of the Communist Party, communist leanings, communist sympathies, would not get work in Hollywood. And there was no official list, but everybody knew who was on it. If your name got published in this newsletter called Red Channels, your career went down the tubes overnight. Gary Cooper gets called in, and he's a friendly witness. He's not opposed to it. He does not name names. He does not name any projects. He does say, I would be against any film that inserted communist propaganda into the script, and I have turned down scripts because of that. But he doesn't name any films, and he's a friendly witness. In 1952, Carl Foreman gets called in before HUAC. Carl Foreman was a member of the Communist Party. Not in 52, he had left, but he had been a member of the Communist Party. And he gets called in, and he won't cooperate. He is an unfriendly witness. And this causes a huge rift between him and Stanley Kramer. Stanley Kramer becomes fearful that his company and he will be tarred by the same brush as Carl Foreman is about to be tarred with. If you were an unfriendly witness before HUAC, that was it. Your career was over. And Kramer did not want that to happen to him. So he wants Carl Foreman, this is even before he testifies, to leave the film and leave the company. He'll pay him off, but he wants him to leave. He basically fires him from the film. And both Zinnemann and Gary Cooper said, if he goes, we go. So Carl Foreman stays with the film. And Gary Cooper is the biggest name in Hollywood to support Carl Foreman. Everybody else walks away from him. And he says, out of all the big names, Coop was the only one to help. And this is where the parable element comes in Foreman's words. So he's in the midst of writing the film while all this is going on. And he says, as I was writing the screenplay, it became insane because life was mirroring art and art was mirroring life. It was all happening at the same time. I became that guy. I became the Gary Cooper character. Carl Foreman's career is about to go down the tubes, and all of his friends are abandoning him. Well, that's exactly what happens to Will Kane in High Noon. His other statement, he being Foreman, was a lot of the dialogue in the film was almost the dialogue I was hearing from people and even in the company. You could walk down the street and see friends of yours recognize you and turn and walk the other way. So when you read or hear that High Noon is a parable about McCarthyism, what we're getting at is not HUAC per se, but what happens when you are in that situation where you are called up before a group like HUAC and you stand up for what you believe in, and that goes counter to all of your friends. And all of your friends walk away from you because of the stand you're taking. That's exactly what happens in High Noon. Ironically, in High Noon, Will Kane is standing up for law and order, and he's standing up to protect the town. And they are still all abandoning him and walking away from him. So that is the anti-McCarthyism element of High Noon. Somebody pointed out in an essay written about this that it's kind of harder to see it today when we're so far away from it. And you got to be careful what you read into it, because a case could be made that Will Kane represents HUAC, and he is standing up to the outlaw gang that's coming to town, and the outlaw gang being the communists. So you could flip that very easily and say it represents that. I don't quite agree with that analysis, but it shows, when you read these things and these comparisons, you want to think about it. Okay, High Noon comes out and is a critical and commercial success, huge success. Although it takes a while for it to gain traction. People are first of all, it's not your typical Western. It's not Technicolor. It's not these beautiful shots of the prairie with clouds in the sky. It's black and white. And if you think about it, very little happens until the gunfight at the end. You've got one fight in a barn, and other than that, there's no shoot-'em-ups. And here's the thing, God darn it. You've got a U.S. Marshal who's afraid, and he admits he's afraid. This is downright un-American. We can't have U.S. Marshals being afraid. No how, no way. And you've got a town that refuses to help them. Where in America is this? And this is why the people who did, viewed the film as un-American. To the point that John Wayne later said that he and Howard Hawks made the film Rio Bravo because they hated High Noon so much. Because in High Noon, you've got a marshal who's afraid, you've got townspeople that won't help, and who saves the marshal at the end? His wife, who's a Quaker. This is not an American Western. So both Hawks and John Wayne claim they made Rio Bravo specifically because they hated High Noon. Now, this is full of ironies, because High Noon comes out and Gary Cooper is nominated for the Academy Award. He is in Europe when the ceremony comes around. He and John Wayne were friends. They weren't enemies. So he asks John Wayne, if I win the award, will you go up and accept it for me? And they're friends, and John Wayne says, yeah, okay. And he wins. So now John Wayne has to go up and do an acceptance speech for High Noon, a film that he hates. And he says in his acceptance speech, and it was a joke, this could not have gone to a better man and a better American, and now that I've said that, I'm going to go and ask my agent why I didn't get High Noon. Even though he was offered it and turned it down. American presidents really liked the film. It was Eisenhower's favorite film. The story goes, depending on what version you read, Bill Clinton screened it either 17 or 20 times at the White House. And Bill Clinton said, if I can find that quote, which I may not... well, he basically said, I won't look for the quote, it's not only politicians who relate to this film, it's anybody who has ever stood up for what they believed in the face of everybody's opposition knows what it's like to be alone in that way that Will Kane was. And in that moment, we all become Will Kane. So, and that is ultimately what the film meant for Zinnemann, Fred Zinnemann. He said, see if I have, well, I know the quote. He said, the film is about somebody needs help. And everybody he goes to for reasons of their own, which are sometimes good reasons, refuse to help. And this is human nature. This is something that is inherent and universal to human nature, and that is why this film is timeless. Zinnemann and Carl Foreman did not see it as a political film. They saw it as a story about human nature. When we ask for help, do we get it or not? And why do we not get it if we don't get it? And how does that affect what happens next? And I've thought about this a lot too. Whenever there's a disaster, there's an earthquake, people are buried under a highway. They need help. If nobody goes to help them, they stay under the highway and they don't get rescued. So we all need each other. We're all part of that common fabric, and we all at times need to help each other, and if not, there are very bad results. Finally, to sum up about Gary Cooper, as I say, there are distinct elements of his acting. He doesn't become the character. Instead, he brings his personality to the role. And he really was like that in real life, that shucks, oh, shucks. In fact, when he won that first Academy Award, he got up for the acceptance speech and he says, "Shucks, I've been dreaming about this all my life. Funny thing, in my dream, I always make a better speech." So he really was that oh, shucks kind of guy. If he was in a group of people, he wouldn't be the one to do all the talking. He said, if other people have something interesting and worth hearing, I keep quiet and I, let them do the talking. Even though he didn't become the character, that authenticness of his own personality shone through. And other actors would comment on this, and other directors would comment on this. I have a few quotes here. John Barrymore said, "This fellow," meaning Cooper, "is the world's greatest actor. He does without effort what the rest of us spend our lives trying to learn, namely to be natural." Charles Laughton said, "In truth, that boy hasn't the least idea how well he acts. He gets at it from the inside, from his own clear way of looking at life." Two directors commenting on Gary Cooper. Howard Hawks, who directed Sergeant York, said, "He worked very hard, and yet he didn't seem to be working. He was a strange actor because you'd look at him during a scene and you'd think, this isn't going to be any good. But when you saw the rushes in the projection room the next day and you could read in his face all the things he'd been thinking." And Sam Wood, who directed him in Pride of the Yankees, said, "On the set, you'd swear it's the worst job of acting in the history of motion pictures. On the screen, he's perfect." And that's it. When you see him, and I enjoy, even in a bad Gary Cooper film, I watch his face. He's got these moments of silence where he's going through changes, generally regret or pain, and you do see it in his mouth and in his eyes. You see this character in some kind of turmoil or transition. You see it in comedies. You see it in Meet John Doe. You see it in High Noon. It's these moments where the character has just had a revelation or been rejected or realizes, oh boy, I'm in trouble now, and you see it all in his face. He's not doing anything, and it's all there. And that is, I think, what makes him such a really good actor. And even more than that, what makes him such a pleasure to watch. And as I say, even in the bad roles. In this last film he made in 1961, The Naked Edge, it's this really cheesy attempt at film noir. And he's older, and he's stiffer than he's been, and you still see those inner workings in his eyes and his mouth and his face. So that, to me, makes him such a pleasure to watch. Questions, thoughts before we break? Anything? Okay, then. Take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll meet at High Noon. We are back. Just a very quick thing about the music. Somebody made a comment, and I should. The soundtrack in this is like, the music in this is like a third character. And in any really well-made film, that's what you're going to have. When movies start, we take this for granted today, the soundtrack, and we're not even aware of it. It's telling us how to feel, when to feel tense. There was a time in the early days of movies where this did not exist. One person actually created what has been called the narrative musical score, and that was Max Steiner. And it was one specific film. I'm blanking out on the name of it. It's a Joel McCrea film that was kind of scandalous because it had a nude scene in it. And before that film, and that was in the early 30s or mid-30s, music was just willy-nilly in a film. And then Max Steiner came along and he said, we can use music to help tell the story. And for that film, which I have to look up the name of, from then on. So, and in fact, along the same topic, there was a time when there were no movie credits. D.W. Griffith created movie credits. So these things we see today at one time didn't always exist and were often the creation of one particular individual, and today we take them for granted. So I just thought I would throw that in. Okay, let us see what we can do here. I am going to show the beginning of the film just to get us into the music. We're not going to do the whole film. And, you know, a couple of you have said, oh, the music's a little cheesy in Tex Ritter's voice. Keep in mind, this is the 50s. We are not in a particularly sophisticated era of American culture. Country music is a very set genre, and this became a huge hit, even with, you know, the singing and the music. We were having sound problems before, so I hope they've been fixed. And it looks like they're not. Because that's Lee Van Cleef. Nasty nose and all. I'm going to need technical help here because we had this issue before. Somebody up in the control room? Okay. The music is going on here. We're hearing that plucking guitar. Here's Herbert. You broke it again. We'll blame Scott. We're blaming Scott for everything today. I hit play and I don't know what's going on. I can vamp, but while he's doing, never mind the man behind the curtain. So the film opened, yes, question? She's saying the scene in the saloon where he goes looking for help. They've got all these familiar faces of all these character actors in every Western she's ever seen. Yeah, I'm not coming through. So my mic is on. There's a quick little foot. Can you hear me in the back without the mic? So. Okay, I will talk loud to tell this story, which has nothing to do with High Noon. John Huston, who directed The Maltese Falcon, later made another film. I forget the name of it. And there was one scene in a bar, and he gathered everybody from The Maltese Falcon. No lines, no dialogue, just to populate that bar in that film, just as a kind of an inside joke. So, and there are character actors, that's what they're called character actors, who just show up, you know their faces, you have no idea who they are, you don't know their names, but they just show up in these films all the time, yeah. I meant to go through the list of Oscars that it won. The film, wait, I didn't hear that, what?
We want you to hum it.
You want me to hum the music? You got the wrong person. I couldn't even pick up a tune, let alone hum one or carry one.
Can we take a 2-minute break?
We are going to take a 2-minute break. I've just been told to work on this. Two quick things. I meant to run through the Academy Awards nominations. The film, High Noon, was nominated for Best Motion Picture. It lost to The Greatest Show on Earth. Go figure. Fred Zinnemann was nominated as Best Director. He lost to John Ford, The Quiet Man. Gary Cooper won for Best Actor. Carl Foreman was nominated for Screenplay. He lost to The Bad and the Beautiful. The editing won for editing, and it won for scoring. Dmitry Tiomkin won, and it won for Best Song. The other thing I meant to say was the cinematographer on this was David Crosby's father. David Crosby, the rock musician, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So that's an interesting thing. He was also blacklisted, by the way. Not David Crosby, but his father. So we had that. Okay, so you can hear me. We are going back to... Oh, we are not going anywhere yet. This film was heavily criticized in Russia, in the Soviet Union, by the way, because it glorified the individual. Think about that. So again, the core story, there's all this myth and mythos about it. It comes down to what we talked about, that some guy needs help. In this case, he happens to be the marshal. And what the town does is particularly egregious because they are not acting in their own best interests. They convince themselves. It's a funny kind of story. because Frank Miller is established as ruthless and brutal and just a real mean son of a bitch. And they say, well, if you're not in town, Will Kane, he'll go away and leave us alone. And yet, given everything they know about him, they are willing to take that chance. Now, on the other hand, it is said when he was around, the town was doing well. The saloon was thriving. So it kind of parallels, somebody who is not the best person to lead a given place is still popular anyway, and people would like him around, even though in their heart they know he is not the right person to be around. And the people who stand up to that other person are vilified, where that person comes in and he can make the town great again. I don't know where that came from. But if you think about it, there's that kind of parallel where the townspeople, for the most part, convince themselves they're better off without Will Kane, even if that means Frank Miller comes to town and has free reign. A commentator, this is a different element of the film, says there are 2 points in the film where a character asks, essentially, what is wrong with me? Harvey asks Will Kane, why didn't I get the role as new sheriff? And when Grace Kelly goes to Helen Ramirez, she says, well, what would you do? Why do you think I'm not a good wife? And she says, well, if you don't know, I can't tell you. And in both cases, the person seeking this self-knowledge is told, if you don't know, I can't tell you. And that conveys the message that we are all aware of ourselves, of our inner selves. And it goes back to Will Kane saying, this is who I am, this is who I have to be. If I cannot be my true self, I cannot live with myself. The other ironies in the film, there are 2 people who do help him. Well, actually 3, 2.5. There are 3 people who do help him. There's the one guy in town who comes to him. He's the first through the door. He says, well, I'll help, until he finds out that he's going to be alone. And he, out of everybody, is kind of, to my way of thinking, the most sympathetic refuser. He turns him down because he is not a professional gunfighter, and he has a wife and kids to think about. And he will step up if he's got enough support, but when he finds out it's him and Will Kane, he backs away. Now, what I can't figure out is why couldn't he put him up on a roof with a rifle and not have him down in the street? But if we do that, we have a very different movie. That's the thing. For this movie to work, everybody has to, for one reason or another, not help. The other 2 people who help, one is the drunk in the saloon, who comes out and goes, he's got one eye. But he steps up. And the other is this kid, this 16-year-old kid who steps up. And as much as Will Kane needs the help, he has to turn them both down. Because if he lets them help, he's putting them in jeopardy. The guy with the eye patch who needs a drink to be steady, he's going to get killed. And you can't send a 16-year-old out there to help you. That's going on the other end of the spectrum, the morality spectrum. So he has to turn them down. The other 2 people who you would think would step up is the ex-marshal. And this is what Zinnemann was getting at with some people have good reasons for refusing. He would, morally, in his heart, he would help, except he's got really bad arthritis in his hands. Herbert, am I good or not yet? Okay. And he says, if I'm there, you're going to get killed worrying about me. So he means it. He means it. So ironically, to protect Will Kane, he has to refuse to help him. The other is the Henry Morgan character, his best friend. He turns him down. Really, it's expressed in a different scene where, well, if he'd only leave town, this whole thing would go away. So he rationalizes, well, and we don't see this in the film, but it's clearly established, well, if you leave town, this whole thing goes away. And that comes out in the church. He goes to the church, And what I find interesting about the church scene is the pastor's first inclination is, what the hell are you doing here? Get out. He doesn't say get out. But the pastor, who's a man of God, sees Will Kane enter the church and says, you got married this morning and you didn't see fit to get married here, which is basically saying, get out. And no, let's let him speak. And then in the beginning, the young men in church say, well, what are we waiting for? And like 4 or 5 of them get up and they will help until the voices of reason say, hang on, let's talk about this. And Thomas Mitchell, who is Will Kane's best friend, organizes this little town meeting. And interesting, at that moment, he cuts off Will's help. If Thomas Mitchell, the character, had only shut up at that point, you have all these young guys in town who are willing to help. And by stepping in to do the right thing, everybody comes back to this, I'm doing the right thing now. By doing the right thing and giving everybody a voice, he chops off that momentum to help Will. And so once the town gets to talking, everybody now finds different ways to make this go away. The whole problem is Will Kane. If you'd only leave town, God damn you, this wouldn't be a problem. So talk about mass rationalization and groupthink. Yes? Yeah, that's another... That's the thing, when you look, so the point she's making, for those of you who didn't hear, is Thomas Mitchell's whole point of saying, let's talk about this, is what will people in the North think about our town if there's a big shootout in the street, which winds up happening anyway. It comes down, it comes down to you can talk yourself into anything. And when there's group think going on, it's even more likely the group think takes over. What was I going to say? Yeah. So it's almost we're going to save the town by destroying it. And to them, it's simple. Get out of town, Will Kane, and this thing goes away. That's what Lloyd Bridges does in the barn when he sees him saddling the horse. He says, yes, go, get out of town. Several people, the judge, Thomas Mitchell, we're sorry you came back. We had you out of town. And in fact, if you look carefully, I just noticed that the last time I saw the film, after the wedding, when in fact he does leave town, the ex-marshal, as soon as he's in the buckboard, slaps the horse. They cannot get him out of town fast enough. And you can almost hear this collective sigh of relief. We got him out of town. And again, if you break it down and analyze it, all of this thinking will break down, because all these decent people who want their town not to have shootouts in the street, what do they think is going to happen if Frank Miller stays? The saloon will thrive and get rowdy. He will, if he decides to stay, will basically take over the town. Or the new marshal, who we never do meet, has to come in and get rid of Frank Miller, and there'll probably be a shootout in the street. So no matter how you slice this, these people are talking themselves into this path that they think is the right path, and keep in mind they're doing all of this in 80 minutes, so they're under the gun, because when that high noon, Frank Miller arrives. So they are basically scrambling to find a way out of this situation they found themselves in, and they are grabbing at what appears to be the easiest right choices and decisions. This is human nature. That's the other thing. People are self-contradictory. So think about it. How often have...
Someone out again.
The sound is... I'm out? Okay, you can ask your question. Okay, yes, I guess we should talk about Grace Kelly, and I apologize if you're having trouble hearing me. Even before we get to that, my friend who I watched the film with, her immediate response to Grace Kelly is, sure didn't take long for her to leave him. Married, they're beyond engaged. In the Virginian, they were going to be engaged. Here they're married. Wow. They have just gotten married. They have sworn to love, honor, cherish, and obey. And basically, if you go out there, I'm out of here. Where's that stand by your man thing? Which Helen Ramirez, who, by the way, my friend watching the film, kept seeing Helen Ramirez as a prostitute. I said, no, they're not going there. She is not a prostitute. She has been involved with 3 men in town. That does not make her a prostitute. She's a businesswoman. She owns the store. So let me make that very clear. She is not a saloon singer. She is not a prostitute. She's the woman Gary Cooper should have married to begin with instead of Grace Kelly. Why they split up is not clear. They imply that it's maybe because he met Grace Kelly. But the whole Grace Kelly, here's the thing about that. Now, maybe if they cast it differently, we wouldn't be having these apparent contradictions. In order for the story to work, you need the Grace Kelly character. If you have Helen Ramirez instead of Amy, she's going to pick up a gun and go out into the street with him, and we lose the whole middle of the film. We are back with the dilemma of Casablanca. These are Nazis hunting Victor. They would kill him on sight, and if you do that, you have no movie. So as a creator of Casablanca, you have to keep Victor alive for the entire movie, however you do it. Here, we have to have nobody helping Gary Cooper, however we do it. Otherwise, we lose the whole middle of the movie, and we lose that climax where she saves him, which personally I was disappointed in. Not her saving him, but the way they did it. I think they missed several beats. Basically, she's standing there. We see the other outlaw, not Frank Miller, come up. And if you extend that a little bit more, what Hitchcock would have done is there would have been several cuts between him and Will Kane getting closer and closer to a clear shot, of him having a clear shot at Will Kane. And just as he's about to take his shot, then she shoots him in the back. And for some reason, it feels, to me, very rushed, where she just shoots him in the back and saves him. Yes? The point is, would the film have been enriched if we introduced the Civil War, maybe one from the North, one from the South? I say no, for this reason. That introduces another political element. The way the film is structured now, it's total human nature. Frank Miller was in charge of this town. Apparently, it was a wide-open town at that point. Will Kane comes in as the new marshal. This is all backstory. And cleans up the town. He gets rid of Frank Miller. So this is personal. This isn't about North versus South. We have the outlaw Josie Wales for that.
It could have been veterans at war.
No, it could have been, but you said, would that add anything to it? And I'm suggesting it would not have added and possibly maybe detracted. It's more universal. This is, forget war, this is about 2 men who have their own agenda, which happens to be, one is outlaw, one is law and order. And this is personal between them, so we don't need the North-South thing, and it wouldn't necessarily enhance it. This is all about ethical and moral behavior, and so you want to keep it focused on that. And that brings us straight up to 20 after, so the class is technically over. Apologies. We totally blame this Fromm staff, which is always terrible. We know that. Any last points anybody wants to make or anything? Yes. If I do that, I'll be cutting into the next film. So I would love to, especially the beginning, but no, because then we'll lose time from the other film. So apologies for this, and thank you all very much. Yes.